Hello and welcome to the Animation Industry Podcast. My name is Terry, and today I finally completed all 120 shrines in Breath of the Wild. This week I'm chatting with Cameron Slayden, who is the CEO at Microverse Studios. He's also a Mechanism of Action animation producer, which he's going to explain in our chat, and he is a clinical assistant professor at UIC. Now, what makes this chat interesting is Cameron is in the field of medical and scientific animation, a super niche field of animation that you actually need a degree in scientific illustration to get into. In our chat, he's going to share how he got into this field, started his own company, and even how he's using AI tools to help create visuals for microscopic function animations the human eye can't even see. But first, make sure to check out the Patreon for this podcast and help me continue to make more episodes. I've included a link to that in the description of this chat, so please go check it out. And now, without further ado, let's jump in. Hi, Cameron. How's it going today?
Hey, Terry. Going great. How can you hear me all right?
I can hear you perfectly, yeah. You're at a standing treadmill desk, which you just told me that you animate on. So can you just explain? I've never heard of somebody on a treadmill animating before, which to me sounds very interesting because I would expect you'd need a steady hand. So maybe just tell me about that.
Sure. It happened. So I started with a standing desk like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Just because, I have an old back injury and, sitting in a chair kind of kept my back bent in a way. It was uncomfortable. So I got a standing desk and it helped a lot. Standing desks are nice because you can kind of just walk up and start working and then just like walk away. And there's this kind of uncoupling from the desk that you don't get with a chair where you have to kind of scoot in and so forth. It's minor, but it's real. And then, but the thing is that like, sometimes you can pull some long hours and you end up kind of getting like statue syndrome where you kind of settle into this low energy stance where you're kind of like your hips are like off kilter and so forth. And your muscles kind of seize in that stance. And so
yeah, that's literally me currently.
Yeah. So it was like hurting. And so like I had a fat year, so I went ahead and I had been eyeballing a treadmill desk, something to kind of like keep me active while I'm working and so forth. I'm 46, so I want to kind of ride like whatever threads are left of my youth for as long as I can. And then so I got the treadmill desk and I started playing around with it. Like the first week I got it, I like walked 70 miles. I just like tried to see how fast I could walk like while working, and it got kind of hard to function. It did decrease the productivity in the beginning, especially like as my eyes got used to like the bobbing of walking and tracking what's on the screen. It took about 3 days. Neuroplasticity is amazing, but it took about 3 days and I was able to like be totally fine walking on it. But I found that the hardest thing, like in 3D animation, there's a lot of like, grabbing things and moving them around and grabbing very particular little spots, like the little dials, the little axes on an object, if you just want to move it along that axis, or little radio dots, like checking little check boxes and so forth, or sliders, these little kind of minute movements. I mean, from all of my interface, I use a Intuos, like a Wacom tablet. So I have like my hand is planted and I have like just the finger control over what's going on. So like even as I'm walking, like the movement of my arm does relatively little to the end.
Wow. Wow. Okay, great. I've never heard of this and you figured it out and it works for you, and you're maybe I should give this a try myself as I sit on my butt all day long and then try to get to the gym in the morning and then don't want to wake up for it and don't go. So
for a little while I was like counting my work weeks and how many miles I could get. Like I think my biggest was I had a 70-mile work week.
Wow.
But most of the time they would be in the 20-ish miles, 20 to 30.
Oh, that's more than I walk in a whole week in a month, I guess, myself. Okay, but tell me about the type of animation you do, because it's not every day that I talk to somebody who does your type of animation. Tell me the gist of it. You know, you do 3D animation for very specific clients in a very specific niche that doesn't get a lot of attention when people are thinking of animators.
Yeah. So the type of animation that Microverse Studios produces, well, let's step back for a second. And people ask, you know, what do you do for a living? We all get that question. And my answer is always the following. I am a scientist and I'm a 3D animator, and I produce short animated films for biotech and pharmaceutical companies that explain how their technologies operate on a molecular and cellular level. That's like the most concise way I can say it. But in order to be able to do that, number one, you have to have a deep understanding of the science surrounding these topics. So you have to know, for example, which direction DNA turns. You have to know how cell division happens, all the parts inside of a cell and what they do, where things, like what goes on inside of, you have to understand all of that science and how molecules interact. Like molecules are essentially covered with tiny magnets, and that's going to govern with how they stick to one another or don't stick to one another. So like a good understanding of all of that. And then you also have to understand, you know, all the features of animation. You know, you have to understand how to actually create footage. You have to understand the basic principles of aesthetics that go into producing like quality work, and then video editing, linear storytelling. You know, we write all the scripts in-house, so there's a certain degree of scientific science writing that needs to be able to happen, with attention to story structure, and not just talking about the beginning, middle, and end, but you know, the 5 or 7 point story structure that you see in like commercial fiction and in movies, that applies to what we do as well. So being able to kind of synthesize all of that together, it's a big collection of skills that kind of all have to be merged.
Yeah, for sure. So you know, I have tons of questions about this. What type of, this sounds, you know, 3D animation is already very technical already. What type of person would thrive in this environment? It sounds like, you know, scientist first and 3D animator second, like somebody who is very analytical, has a science degree. Like, how would I get into this, and what type of person would thrive in this type of animation?
Well, I have seen people go become molecular biologists and then do a hard right and turn into become scientific animators. There's one person, Gail McGill. He got his molecular biology degree and felt like a total poser when he went into scientific animation, because he was like, I'm not a designer, I'm not an animator, I don't, you know, I'm not really an artist, I'm just a scientist. Whereas the fact is that he knew everything, and he developed the skills to be able to tell the story. So he's like probably the least poser of all of us. And then there's Graham Johnson, who got his master's degree in medical illustration, went on to get his PhD in molecular biology, and now is kind of doing all kinds of different things in both fields. And then there's like the standard person, there's like me, right? So I got my undergrad from University of Maryland. I got my master's degree from Augusta University in—
These were science related degrees?
Yeah, my undergrad degree was interdisciplinary studies. So for me, I'm a little bit unique because I always knew that I wanted to be a scientific illustrator. Animation didn't enter the picture in the beginning, but I knew I wanted to like create imagery about science. And I have a story, kind of how my origin story of how that, like, I made that discovery. But because I knew what I wanted to do, when I went into my undergrad, I made an interdisciplinary studies degree that mixed art and biology, and made sure all of my prerequisite courses for the graduate degrees, that those were already in my program, so I wouldn't have to take anything else afterwards to get ready for the graduate degree.
So it sounds like people who are really excited about science and like explaining that through animation, I guess, very basic.
Yeah, you have to love it. Like, so for example, for me, when I'm just goofing off, my news feed is all science news. Like phys.org, phys.org is like one of my major like news outlets, and like New Scientist and Nature and Science, like all those journals, just because, like, you know, that's the kind of thing that really interests me. And if you don't like science, like if you were the type that fell asleep in biology or whatever, it's not for you.
Not for you at all. Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, what if I'm a 3D animator and I like being really technical about things, and I'm like, maybe this is a interesting career switch. not recommended unless you're, highly science interested or have a degree or master's in something bio related?
The master's is the path of least resistance. Master's degree in medical illustration or biomedical visualization. Like there are four universities in the United States and one in Canada that have degrees specific to scientific visualization. And those will give you the easiest route into the career. It is much harder to go into scientific animation, or you'll have a much more level trajectory in it if you go into the field without the advanced degree. And the reason is that the end client depends on the accuracy of their stuff, and the less like experience you have in the realm. There's a lot of trivia, really tiny things. Like I mentioned, the DNA only spins one way. It spins, like if you picture looking at a car that's facing you, it goes just like the driver's side seatbelt from the driver's bottom right, bottom right to top left, and it only goes that direction. Except for under very specific chemical circumstances that don't happen in life. Anyway, but the point is, so when I got my first like illustration job working at Science Magazine, it was right after the genome had been cracked by Craig Ventnor, and it was this huge deal. They had just released a major issue. Science Magazine is one of the two premier scientific journals in the world. There's Science and there's Nature, and Science was founded by Benjamin Franklin. So long-standing scientific journal, really hoity-toity. And they, the designers at the last second for the human genome issue decided to flip the image on the cover, that there was a big DNA going up the middle of it. So when they flipped it, the DNA was turning the wrong way. The graphic designers did not know that. And the end result was like thousands of letters to the editor pouring into Science Magazine about how their cover was wrong. And it was a huge black eye for the group. And then I came on board and they like practically grabbed me by the shoulders and shouted that I must never get DNA wrong. And so like that was a major thing that I always paid close attention to. And so now if I drive by like a playground slide that turns the wrong way, it gives me anxiety.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But there's like trivia like that all over the place.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So you need a really solid understanding because the clients are relying on you basically to get their animation representation of their stuff right. It's not like you can just hand your storyboards to like, any 3D animator and be like, go for it. It's, everybody's highly involved in the whole process, I guess. So what kind of clients are purchasing scientific animation when, you mentioned cells, molecules and things, and I'm trying to think of applications where general public me would see that type of stuff would be, documentaries, explainer videos, but like what kind of clients is your typical client?
Yeah. Well, the average public is probably not going to see most of our work. And part of it is because there are all these alien environments that don't even necessarily make sense to us. Like you might recognize like DNA, but when you see things sticking to the surface of cells and creating like weird chemical reactions, it doesn't resonate for most people. Or rather, it's not that it doesn't resonate. We make it beautiful so that like you kind of want to stare at it, but most people are going to be like, what am I looking at? And it's not going to carry information that's useful to them. So it's not going to get into their news feed or whatever.
I'm not scrolling Instagram and being like, oh, cool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it does have a certain abstract art look to it, but most of the folks that like our clients are generally companies that have a biotechnology of some sort, whether it's a therapy, like a specific drug they've developed, or a technology for developing therapies. They call them platforms. But something like a platform that is a method for editing DNA, for example, like a very particular method that they can like inject into you and edits only this one little part of your DNA, or they can change cells, they can pull cells out of you, change them, and then put them back into you, things like that. And it's specifically to be shown to investors or to doctors that will then, or the doctors that will then be prescribing this therapy, or it's to show to other pharmaceuticals, hoping that they will they'll acquire them. So like all of those three groups have a fairly deep scientific background already. Like the investors aren't investing in biotech if they don't understand biology.
So why did, okay, so some pharmaceutical or research or whatever develops a new type of therapy or drug or something, and they want to sell this idea that they have to people who might purchase it. Why use a video? Is it just because it makes it easier to explain? If these people already have a scientific knowledge, wouldn't the, you know, results of a double placebo blind test, whatever, be enough to sell it?
That's definitely part of it. Like that kind of like the scientific data backing it up is certainly very important. But understanding the principle of operation, like how it actually works, how all the parts fit together and interact, is very important. And there are essentially three ways to do that. Number one is a giant brick of text that you have to read through and already understand all the terms and so forth. Then the second is a diagram, which is going to be, usually it's in the form of like ovals and arrows pointing to things, and then having stuff break apart, and then like with an arrow to this like leads to cell death or something like that.
Yeah.
So like they're not particularly aesthetically pleasing, and they usually are there to augment the text. And that's what a lot of scientific papers look like. However, your average investor, they get a lot of pitches every day. And so they have to be able to quickly make decisions and be able to make decisions on how to divide their time. And a video is going to take the bones of a paper that would take you half an hour to read, and it's going to boil that down into 90 seconds to 2.5 minutes. Yeah. And if that video is done in a way that looks gorgeous, that like is worth watching just for how pretty it is, then it's much more likely that you're going to get that investor or that doctor or whoever it is to watch all the way through, get the foundational information, and have it resonate with them and make an impact because of the visuals as well. So it optimizes information absorption.
So you're a key part of the sales process for these giant companies who are developing therapies and things like that, it sounds like.
Yeah. So our work, we expect it to be a centerpiece from which all the other comms come out of. Like it doesn't tell the whole story. You know, there's a lot of other data and stuff like that that's going to go into it. That's going to go into their communications, and their webpage is generally going to have a lot more in-depth material, and they're going to have scientific papers to share and so forth. But as far as like what the actual, as far as like how they communicate their material, generally speaking, the animation is going to provide stills and short sequences and so forth that are going to go into all of the different avenues that they communicate in.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm wondering, you know, there's not a ton of companies that might need this. How frequent is the work? I mean, you run a studio, you have employees. I'm just curious, you know, how are there like downtimes? Are you like overloaded with work from these places? Because it sounds like a very, very niche industry for animation specifically. So I'm just curious about this.
Well, so we never have zero time, or almost never have zero time, right? We almost never have moments where like nobody has any work. In 2021, biotech had a major like rush because of COVID. There was a lot of like interest in biotech, a lot of investment and so forth. And so we actually got really overloaded during that time. In 2022, it was much more laid back. We were operating at like sort of optimal, which is usually 20% below capacity. You want nobody to be overworked. And so that's the standard. So, I mean, we produce, what is it? About like what we ask for from our clients is for 5 weeks to produce a given minute of animation, or 1 minute of animation, and then a couple more weeks for each additional minute. So our animators are producing something in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 minutes of animation per year. And so that's, and then there's a total of 5 of us. So you're talking about between, it's 50 minutes to an hour of actual animation footage that we produce every year.
Wow.
And there's enough, like, it seems like there's not very many companies like that, but there's, like, you have big pharma companies that are always working on releasing new drugs. And then you've got the smaller biotech companies that are developing these technologies and these platforms. And those folks are actually the most interesting to work with. Because if you get to work with them, you're going to be dealing with, like, the CEOs, like the folks that invented the technology. They're super enthusiastic. And the kind of stuff that they're doing is like this groundbreaking, crazy work that is straight out of science fiction. I mean, there's like artificial DNA and microscopic robots and like making proteins that don't exist in nature, not just that don't exist in nature, but from amino acids that don't exist in nature, like designing from the ground up life systems. Like, I don't know, it's extremely
fun. That sounds really cool. I'm just wondering, how do you even visualize some of these things if they're on a microscopic level? They're groundbreaking. Nobody's ever even, I don't know, done it before. Like, and illustration's one thing, but when you come to a 3D environment, how are you even conceptualizing some of these things that you have to show in very simple terms?
Well, we don't actually have to show them in very simple terms. The goal is to show them in as realistic terms as possible. And so we have to understand how they all kind of work together in a life environment. Like, and life happens in water. The cells are bags of water and protein. And so there are a lot of resources online that give us access to what's called crystallographic data. So like where they've figured out what the atomic structure is of a given molecule. And so we can bring that into our 3D program and then animate the molecules working together. And we can piece together entire molecular apparatuses. Like there was one, for example, that was about a mechanism, a molecular machine that clipped DNA or that actually put DNA together in a very particular way. And I spent like 3 or 4 days looking at the actual 3D models of these proteins that had been crystallized separately, but each one had a little chunk of one of the others in place on it. And so I would like take the one and it would have a little chunk here of this other one, and I would move the other one in until it was just the right place so I could see the overlap. And then I did that with all of them because they all had these little chunks. And so I pieced together this complex, and you could see that there was this lever sticking out of it, that when that lever moved in a particular way, it would bring the DNA together and force it together so it would snap into place. And like that felt like it felt like reverse engineering and alien technology. There was another time when I had to animate a protein, or sorry, RNA translation into proteins. And there's this molecule that moves along RNA, which is like similar to DNA. And it puts amino acids down depending on what the letter sequence of the RNA is. And the amino acid sequence that makes the protein kind of snakes out through the ribosome and comes out of this little hole. And so I wanted to make sure that that everything was animating properly through that little hole in the ribosome. And so I did the 3D equivalent of like crawling around inside this ribosome and placing little markers that I could then string together to make a spline that I would run the amino acids along. But it felt like crawling around in an alien spacecraft. It was like weird and cramped, and there was like an actual tunnel that led to somewhere, and I got to the end and there was the RNA just like sitting there like an engine inside of a spaceship. It was way cool.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, I can tell you're getting really excited about all the details, problem solving, the storytelling that's going on, conceptualizing it, et cetera. It Sounds super problem solving and really interesting to me. I don't know if this is my forte of animation specifically. What kind of are you using, like Maya or Blender or 3D Studio Max, or it's all 3D, right?
Yeah, it's all 3D. We use Cinema 4D
Cinema 4D.
for our animation. Yeah, and I've been using Cinema 4D since around 2001, and so that's all we use. We use After Effects to do all of our compositing, and we use Conductor to do our cloud rendering. And for the audience members that are in 3D, and they maybe run a smaller studio or a home studio, or they're freelancers or something like that, I strongly recommend you look into Conductor. It's conductortech.com. But what they do is they basically they have a plugin that interfaces with it, and what they specialize in is creating instances that will do all of your rendering for you. That basically becomes an ad hoc farm, a render farm that just appears when you need it, and then downloads all of your stuff to your computer as though you had rendered it locally, but you only pay for the computational time that you're using. And so for us, I used to have like 20 computers back here in the corner, and in a little freestanding air conditioner. And even so, it was still, I couldn't get it below like 85 when everything. And even with that, with all those computers there was still like an upper limit to how fast I could operate. But with Conductor, like everything takes an hour. Like to turn on the computer, the virtual computer, and to upload everything to it, for it to render a single frame, to turn off and download the thing. That whole process pretty much always takes an hour. So if you can render whatever you're doing locally in less time, that you do that. But if you're going to render, like a lot of times I'll render like sequences that might have like 15 or 20-minute frames. Like it takes a long time to render these frames because we're putting so much like, cool stuff into it. And on a local farm, there's no way. Like we have a lot of animation that we have to get through. We can't just be like piling stuff on. There has to be optimization and corner cutting. But with Conductor, time and money are interchangeable. And so as long as you budget for the animation, as long as you budget for the rendering, you can have it without having that panic at the end of the project where you have to schedule 3 or 4 days for rendering alone, and then send stuff back and like have it babysit the render overnight and all of that stuff.
Wow, yeah, I've never heard of this, but that definitely sounds like an option. I with my limited 3D experience, leaving the computer on overnight or like using up other computers, it's a nightmare. So
just yesterday, I was working on a project and I had 500 virtual machines running at once. That's 500 GPUs chewing away on one animation. Like that kind of raw power at your fingertips. The whole thing cost me like $200.
Yeah.
Like unbelievable. And the projects have like budgets in the tens of thousands. So a few $100 is nothing for what we do.
Right. Actually, I wanted to ask you about that. Most people I talk to are TV. So most people, I guess, even like going to animation school and stuff, people consider like there's kind of tiers of animation. There's your commercial work, which is super lucrative because you got, I don't know, Oreo, which wants to drop 50K on 10 seconds or something. I'm just making this up. I don't even know if that makes sense. Then you got TV, which is always like overworked, overtime, lowest budget. Then you have movies where you have insane budgets, lots of time. Where does scientific animation kind of fit in all of this? You just mentioned, tens of thousands of dollars for a project. You also said you only create about, half an hour of animation a year with a team of 5. And it sounds like you're yourself also hard animating. So where does, the super niche animation kind of fit in the overall industry?
Well, so we got our start in TV. And so TV, the way that their pricing, or not pricing, their cash flow is all designed to minimize the cost of the show to maximize the revenue from advertising. And then you switch to a Netflix model, you're still doing some minimizing of cost, because you've got like, a fixed income from the subscribers, but you're trying to grow that subscriber base. So there's more incentive to do better work. And then in the pharmaceutical industry, picture it this way. In the past, pharmaceutical companies would start with an understanding of a particular cellular process and a knowledge that a particular family of molecules might affect like a player in that process, like a protein or something like that is part of that cellular machinery. And so they would start with maybe 1,000 molecules and then test them one by one in test tubes and so forth, using their wet lab technology, test each one for how effective it was. And then when they identified the top hits, maybe 5 or 10, they would then start to test those in cells, and then they test them in mice, and then they test them in humans for safety. And at the end of all of that, that's 10 years of work and $1 billion of investment on their part for something that had about a 50-50 chance of getting through the FDA. If they failed, then it's $1 billion down the drain. If they succeeded, then they had 10 years to make back that billion, plus whatever other losses they made on the other drugs that failed. So it's in their best interests to, if they want to make that $1 billion in 10 years before like the generic version of their drug starts to be released, they need to work on that marketing campaign. They need to make sure that everybody knows how this thing works, why it's good, what its advantages are, etc. So the willingness to pay for the advertising is inverted compared to TV. Like, it's worth it to them if they're going to get a return on their investment. It's worth it to them to get the highest quality work that does the best job of the mission, which is to get the word out. Now, of course, all that's changing with AI. And we can talk a lot about AI. It's affecting everything in the animation industry as well as in our clients, our biotech industry. And I'm sure that there are listeners to this podcast that are probably seeing it affect their end clients as well, how their end clients are doing. But in the biotech industry, that 10 years that used to be spent doing all this wet lab work, now they can essentially say, hey, AI, what proteins are involved with ALS? And then the AI is like, these 3 proteins. And then they can say, okay, hey, AI, what small molecules will inhibit those 3 proteins from doing the thing that makes ALS happen? And then the AI will say, oh, this 50 or 60 molecules will do that. And then they can say, okay, hey, AI, of those 50 molecules that have therapeutic effect, which ones won't kill you? And then the AI will be like, these 3. And then so the biotech in that afternoon now comes away with 3 hits that they can test in their wet lab and actually execute that research work on. And then they can recursively iterate on that. So they can refine, they can say, okay, AI, what if we change this? This is having this effect. What's it going to do? And so it's massively streamlining. What used to be a 10-year process is now a 5-year process, probably going to be 2 or 3 years, in a few more years.
Yeah.
There's going to be a ton of new drugs entering the market that are going to be higher quality. They're going to do a better job of curing ailments. There are illnesses that have historically been impossible to cure or impossible to treat that are now becoming accessible because we're understanding how they work. And there's drugs that are going to be affecting entire biological systems that to date have not been characterized. We don't even understand how they work. We haven't understood how they work until now. And there's going to be a lot more of all of this, which means that we need more medical animators to explain how this stuff works, because all of these companies that are going to be producing this work need to be able to stand out in the noise, and they need to be able to quickly explain how their works, so that they can get a investment, or so that they can actually get the product out to the public.
Yeah.
Which means this industry is definitely going to be growing.
Okay, but maybe devil's advocate, because you just said, you know, in the past, somebody was spending $1 billion. They needed a super amazing marketing campaign. They come to you that they're like, we want the highest quality 3D animation possible. But now you've got, if AI is speeding up the process, now they have lower budgets. They're coming up with more stuff. So they need still high quality AI, or sorry, high quality animation. But their budgets are lower and they're doing these things faster. And also they're using AI. So what's to stop, you know, AI animation from them saying, can we explain this molecule fusing with something else in AI and generating that? And then kind of, you know, I guess the devil's advocate would be, it's going to be faster, cheaper, and now everybody is more accessible in doing it, maybe because of AI.
Yeah, I think that there will be a moment where I don't know when this is going to happen, but I think there will be a moment when, like, your AI video generation tools are you're gonna be able to say, make sure that it's accurate, and, you know, have a T cell killing a cancer cell or something like that, and it'll be able to do that, and you'll be able to, like, verbally art direct it. You'll be able to say, make it glow, make it brighter, make it darker, whatever. So I think that that is in the future, and it behooves interested parties to stay on top of the technology to make sure that they're able to work with it as soon as it's available, and you know, and that's of course a natural anxiety that we all have with AI generative art, doing amazing work in seconds that would have taken us, if we were capable of doing it, would have taken us many days. And of course, you're talking to me, who I've developed a 20-year skill set and knowledge base that gives me a superpower in being able to do this. And it's very possible that AI is going to be completely supplanting, or not supplanting, but able to do what I'm doing better than I can do. There are two thoughts. Number one is that no matter how you cut it, it's a tool that somebody has to want to use. And if you're building a multi-billion-dollar company, you don't want to have to actually make the artwork that accompanies it. You hire somebody to do that. So there'll always be that person that's going to be, you know, handling whatever tools, whether it's Photoshop or AI or whatever. And so that's, like, our industry is going to be, and adjacent industries are going to be adjusting to AI as a tool. But additionally, I think that there's, you know, that for scientific animation, it's going to take longer for that to hit, because, like, I mean, you've seen the AI hands and stuff like that.
Right, of course. Yeah. And you're like, AI, can you please accurately generate a cell? And it can't even draw hands yet. So, I mean, I feel like the public facing AI has only been out for a couple of months. Obviously, it's been developing for many, many years. So, you know, from what we've seen, it's not at its point yet, but who knows, in the near future, it's gonna be pretty amazing and revolutionary, I think, regardless if we are on board or not. Okay, so, you know, in the past, companies would spend a lot of money and needed very few projects, and now it looks like they're going to be spending a lot of money and need a lot of projects. I'm wondering, you know, you've mentioned a couple of times, you know, your studio's 5 people, you're animating, you've got 20 years experience. How did you start this studio in the first place? You know, you have the background, you talk about your education, your animation skills, et cetera, but it's one thing to be like, yeah, I'm a freelancer, to now I'm running a company and supporting a whole bunch of people.
Yeah. Well, so there was like maybe a 3-phase process. My wife, Olivia, is, she's not an artist. She got her start doing writing and modifying contracts for the government. And when we both quit our jobs for me to go to grad school, she hated it, by the way, so it was totally cool for her to quit her job. But we immediately, upon my graduation, founded Microverse Studios under its previous name, which was Cosmocyte, which is a play on words. There's a type of cell called an astrocyte, and we were saying we're like even bigger than that. It's a cosmocyte, except for nobody could spell it, and so for like 12 years, I had to spell out my email address every time I gave it to anybody, or like my company, a nightmare. And so we changed it to Microverse Studios. Everybody can spell it. It works great. But in any case, at first, I had no idea. I didn't know who our clients were going to be, whether we're like, do doctors buy this stuff? Like I didn't understand anything about it. And so probably the first year and a half was me trying to figure out where to get any work from.
Yeah.
Luckily, the area that we happened to live in had some production studios that did documentary series for National Geographic and Discovery and History Channel and so forth. And so we got TV projects with those groups. And over the course of probably 5 years-ish, like between 2005 and 2010, we built out like essentially a TV production studio for creating these visuals for a TV production, with the goal of eventually transitioning to pharmaceutical and biotech and so forth.
Yeah.
But I could see that the way TV worked was kind of like, it was a grind, and it was a little bit abusive to the talent. Like there were several other studios like ours, like in the area, and you'd see they would get a big project and you'd see them swell in numbers, and all these animators would get hired on and editors and so forth. And then the project would be done and everybody's unemployed again. And so it was this famine nonstop. And, you know, for me as like the studio owner or co-owner, it was stressful because, you know, I had to be constantly trying to find these new projects, especially as they were like, you know, running out. And it was weird. Like we would get like subsequent seasons of a TV show, but each season it seemed like they were trying to cut out the budget, make it cheaper and cheaper.
Right.
And that was kind of painful. And eventually we started to finally get some pharmaceutical work and biotech work. And that was through email.
Yes. So sorry, I just want to stop you right there. So, you know, you quit, your wife quit her job, you went to do your master's, and you're like, now we started a company, and you ended up getting some work in a related field, not specifically the biopharmaceutical. How did you get that first biopharmaceutical client when you're already, you know, grinding on the other stuff? How did you manage to breach into a super niche in the industry that isn't connected to what you were currently doing?
Well, we had a web page that was dedicated, like that said we were scientific animation. It was a scientific animation studio for pharma. And
even though you had never done any scientific animation for pharma before?
We had done a little bit, and it was all through sort of contacts and friends in the industry.
Gotcha.
We had some work that we could say, yes, we had done something for Genzyme. Yes, we had done something for Sanofi for this group, but they were all like really tiny projects. And one day, a guy essentially emailed me and we set up a call, and he said, look, if you pay me $400 for each of these calls, I will set up introduction calls for you with biotech companies.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, you know,
you were just like, yeah, $400, I'll set up a call.
Yeah. And so, and you know,
this guy's just banking on his connections.
Well, it was all through email. So he like put together an email campaign. He sent it out. He like got the lists and so forth and sent them out, and it started working. We started getting like pharmaceutical work, and it was not to completely supplant TV work, like, but it would supplement it. So we did pharmaceutical work and TV work for a while, and
just you and the people you had hired for a TV production, basically.
Yeah, they were all contractors. So. But I tried to keep them all hired, you know, keep them all like working, so that there wasn't like a lot of downtime. And then eventually that was exhausting enough. I realized that the pharmaceutical work that we were bringing in was certainly enough to handle me and my production manager. Or enough to occupy us. So I didn't really need to have this big studio space. And so we kind of packed up the studio, went completely virtual. I moved from Maryland to Florida, and essentially for probably 6 or 7 years, lived sort of the freelance life. You know, so I owned a studio and then shrunk it and became essentially like a freelancer doing just exclusively pharmaceutical work, no more TV. Wow. And that paid the bills, and it was nice. And then in 2018, we changed the company name to Microverse Studios. It was a brilliant move on our part, but the way that we did it was not good. And this is an important like object lesson, I think, for anybody trying to do this. We closed down Cosmosite. and opened up microversestudios.com. And in doing so, lost all of the SEO from Cosmosite.
Yeah.
10 years of SEO gone.
Start
And
from
then
scratch.
what we didn't realize was that email marketing that had been working so well, it had dried up. We were only getting hits from the website. And so, and it was because spam filters and email sorting algorithms had gotten so good that all of our promotional emails were going into like a promotional folder or into spam or whatever. And so people weren't seeing it. And so we weren't getting any return on that. And so like it was about in mid 2019 that we really like realized what was going on. And it was a moment of crisis because to date, like you can tell, I had no idea like who our clients were, how we were going to get the work or anything like that. I just had something that was like a black box that just magically worked and then it stopped working. And so at that point, I had to come up with like, how am I going to salvage this situation? And I knew that it was the best thing to ever happen to the company, because where I had been resting on, magic, essentially, and now I had to learn the details of my industry. And I had enough experience to be able to look back on what I had done, who we worked with, and actually kind of like retroactively assess and figure out, okay, these are our clients. These biotechs are our clients. This specific phase of their life is when they use us, when they have this kind of drug in the pipeline, when like like identifying the very specific almost credentials or the profile of who the ideal client was, and then figuring out how to reach like who in that company was the person to talk to, and then figuring out how to talk to that person. Once we got all of that together, once we figured that out, we got more work than we could handle.
Of course,
And in fact, that was like late 2019. We put out our first job posting because I was working like 16-hour days, no weekends, just like nonstop, working as hard as I possibly could. Also, at the same time, another feature of what we had done was to completely redouble the effort of elevating the quality of work that we were producing. Because when you are just sitting back on your laurels, like you have just a way of doing everything. And I would say that the work that I did between 2011 and 2017, let's say 2012 and 2018, that 6-year period was probably the least impressive work I've ever done in my life. A lot of great projects, but not very inspired. So in addition to developing, how to get in front of the clients, I also just threw myself into like creating a methodical method, like just a technical method for injecting inspiration into every project, like just coming up with visual metaphors and identifying cognitive features of visuals that make them impossible to look away from. Like if you look at Microverse Studios animation, if you look at the demo reel on our webpage, it's going to be all over the place as far as the style goes, but there are a few key features like of contrast and saturation and use of light and in-scene lighting that are consistent across all of them, that are cognitive just tricks that are designed to get you to want to look at it. And I developed that. I figured that stuff out. And then, we had all this extra work coming in. Luckily, we had cloud computing. At the time, it was not Conductor. Conductor didn't exist. It was Zinc by Google, which then later closed down. It's another story. But in any case, luckily, there was online cloud computing that made it so that I didn't have to constantly worry about my extra computers burning up or getting backed up. But I had to hire people. So I hired Stephen Boyd, an amazing animator. And then I hired Molly, another amazing animator. And then I hired Amanda. And then I hired Leo. Like we just had to keep hiring and hiring and hiring and hiring because it was just more and more and more and more work we had to do. And it's very hard to find folks that have the combination of the eye and the interest,
Wow. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. What you essentially described to me was just, you were figuring out your unique strategy in the market. It sounds like you finally entered the industry that you knew you wanted to be in, biofarm. And then you took a good look at, instead of saying, okay, who are the clients I actually want? Who are the clients that do best with us and our ideal client? And then creating a strategy to essentially attack those clients with something that's really unique and wows them. So you're doing, on the technical artistic side, you're upping your quality, and on the strategic business side, you're figuring out who exactly in that company you go for, which is applicable to every single business that exists. I'm wondering, as a layperson, finding somebody who has the power to make a business decision at a biopharmaceutical company sounds impossible to me. How did you, if you don't mind sharing, how did you end up, once you identified it's, I don't know, whoever it was in that process, how did you end up connecting with them at different companies? Is it conferences? Is it email marketing again? Is it going to people on LinkedIn? Is this, if you don't want to share this, it's also totally cool.
Understand. No, I can talk about what works. The most effective thing that we've done is working on our SEO. The majority of new business that we get is from walk-ins. However, finding the right people in the companies, I did use LinkedIn in the beginning. Like the Sales Navigator is a wonderful tool for like digging into a company and finding everybody that's in there. However, people kind of look at LinkedIn as being sort of like business Facebook. I don't want to be solicited on LinkedIn.
Yeah, for sure.
Folks are like, they link up with me and they're like, hey, I want to talk to you about our explainer video service. We can augment your offerings.
Locked.
And I'm like, no, thanks. Thank you, but no, thank you. And, like, I don't want to be that guy on LinkedIn as well. But LinkedIn, what it does do is it's sort of like Instagram for business, right?
Yeah.
So my clientele, biotech CEOs and chiefs of marketing and, business strategists and so forth, investor relations, these people that are thinking in terms of how are we going to tell our message, they're not spending time on Instagram, or if they're on Facebook, they're not like looking for, they're not like there for business. Whereas if they're going on LinkedIn, maybe they're, just puttering around on LinkedIn or something like that to see what their colleagues are doing. If they're linked in with me, they will likely see the kinds of stuff that we're posting.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And LinkedIn does have promoted ads and so forth. We haven't really done anything with that yet, but I'm planning on doing that. We have our website is under development, and we'll be launching a new one probably within the next 30 days. And I'm very excited about it. Once that happens, we'll go on a total business development jack because
I mean, I kind of asked because I was curious because, your website, you have case studies and you have a blog and all these other things, and you're very text heavy as well in how you explain things, which is all key indicators of, executing like the SEO strategy. So I was super curious about, how you ended up figuring out who to talk to and doing that thing, because that's kind of atypical of animation studios. Animation studio is typically, here's my reel and the clients I've worked with, email, and that's it. But it's a totally different selling process for what you're doing. So yeah, interesting.
So keep in mind that every project is a sales pitch for the next project.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's how I consider everything I do as well.
like you get a biotech with, you're going to be interacting with 3 or 4 different people. You got the CEO and you've got the CFO and maybe the marketing specialist. And, in another couple of years, they're probably going to round out that project and start new ones. And if you get a good impression, then you're the known quantity. They know what they can get out of you. They know exactly like what it's going to be like. And so we've had a lot of work that just comes from diaspora, and especially like we've done work in big pharma, and they're constantly moving, and people are moving from one company to another and back and so forth. And so they'll bring us from one company to another company, and all of a sudden now we have 2 groups that really love us. So customer service is a huge part of building that business base that keeps the repeat business coming in.
Yeah, 100% makes sense. I'm wondering, you know, you're 5 people, you've been in this business for 20 years. Do you have plans to grow into a much larger studio, or to kind of keep things where you're at with the culture and the type of projects? I'm just wondering, you know, what is the future of Microverse Studios and Cameron Slayden and his wife look like?
Her name is Olivia.
Olivia.
Cameron and Olivia, what's our future for this? And I, you know, we're still trying to figure that out. The current, I would say, 5-year plan is to continue to expand our footprint in the industry. I definitely want to reach out to bigger pharma clients to whatever extent.
Is there a lot of competition from other studios that do the same thing as you?
There's a lot, yes and no, right? So there are numerous scientific animation studios that have a lot of animators that love doing scientific animation, but that don't have the scientific backgrounds. So they require hand-holding. They're also at a lower price point than us.
I see.
And then there's numerous agencies that specialize in big pharma, and their price point is many times what ours is for the same exact quality and quantity of product. So where we are right now in the emerging biotech market, I want to expand into the pharmaceutical.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. That sounds very attractive.
However, that's very hard to get into. There's a whole apparatus that you have to get to know. Like, it's all about who you know at that point. And so I'm still working out just the plan of attack for how to get into developing contacts.
You need a dedicated business development person just to get into the door and maintain those customer relationships, like you were mentioning.
And people like that are like leprechauns. They're very hard to find. Somebody who, like, I mean, they exist, and I'm sure that we will eventually find them. As it is, we do get like large pharmaceutical companies occasionally. Somebody does a search, like, I need an animation for my mechanism of action, and they do a search for us. The SEO pays off, so that's great. I know that with more intentional pursuit, we can get better penetration.
Totally. I'm also, you know, if the payload is so high, and there are agencies that are already working with these people, they're 100% actively trying to get these people's work. So, you know, for somebody to come through SEO from that, it sounds much more rare versus having somebody dedicated to getting there. So does that mean you will be expanding the team and growing and, you know, trying to capture the market that you have right now and this bigger market as well, and then slowly moving that way?
Yeah, I think my vision for Microverse Studios is to get somewhere like, it is in the next 5 years. I'd like us to be probably in the 10 to 15 animator range. That's my goal. You know, it's hard to tell. 2023 is a big question mark, but we've made really good choices so far, and we've been really responsible with our cash. So I think that the future for what we're able, like, how we'll be able to expand organically, as long as I can get talent. You know, the hard part is scaling. Like, the hard part for scaling is finding these ultra specialized people. I'm now a assistant clinical professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago. They have a biovisualization program. I'm intentionally there to help the next generation be ready to do this stuff. Like, I'm not saying that I'm like trying to cherry pick animators straight out of the school, but I want there to be, I know that my company is going to be bigger. I want there to be a pool of highly talented and excited and enthusiastic animators to be able to choose from, or not to choose from, to be able to you know, pitch to, you know, like our advertising, our whole marketing setup, it faces two directions. Number one, it faces the clients, because we want the clients to know that we're, you know, among the best there is. But the other direction is to the talent. We want the best talent that's out there. We want rock stars to work in Microverse Studios, and treat our animators like rock stars. And we want people that want to be rock stars to reach out to us.
Totally. I love that. I love that you're investing in, the next generation and, trying to raise the tide for everybody or whatever the saying is.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess my last question is, throughout your career in life, you've made a lot of gutsy moves, which have also felt very strategic. You knew what you wanted to get into from the start, scientific illustration, then animation. You and your wife both quit your jobs to take a couple of years off, find yourselves, start a studio, didn't know what you were doing, found yourself in a space that wasn't exactly what you were doing. So you decided to, take another gutsy move and pivot into something else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What has given you the confidence to pursue exactly what you want and take those gutsy moves throughout your life and to end up in this space?
The analogy that I always use, that, by the way, that's a fantastic way of describing the whole journey. Well spoken. The analogy I always use is that, like, if you could think of life as being like a maze, like a hedge maze, and you can't really see what's on the other side of the hedges and stuff like that. You're starting in the center and you're trying to work your way out. If you have a point on the horizon, like a bright spot, a light on the outside that's you can see above the hedges.
Yeah.
The direction you want to go, then the walls are something to go over or through or under. The obstacles in life are not something to redirect you, but something that you simply have to deal with in order to advance. So for me, I have had this picture of, for me, honestly, it began with a lifestyle, like with a picture in my head of how I wanted to live. And that picture was when I was in high school. I found Frank Netter's Atlas of Human Anatomy. And there's this picture, I think I actually have it here. This picture of Frank Netter, the godfather of medical illustration. There's this picture of him, right here.
Okay. All right. He's wearing some jeans, a blue shirt. He's sitting in his illustrating room, and he's just at his drawing table, posing for the camera.
Probably a golf course behind him, just living the life, chilling out. This guy is doing what he wants to do, and that, to me, that was like the lifestyle that I wanted. In addition to loving, that was after I did realize that I loved scientific data.
Yeah, you found a hero to kind of look up to. This guy figured it out, and he's doing the thing.
Yeah, and so I chased that. And, I would say that I achieved that back in 2011, when we dissolved the office and started just virtualize the office, and everybody started working from home. And now I'm trying to, for my animators, we're completely virtual. So all the animators are working from home, and I'm trying to give them, I'm trying to give them the perfect working scenario as much as is possible. Some people prefer working in an office, and I can't offer that. But I can offer them, an extremely supportive environment where they get all of the training they could possibly want. They get, we cover their membership to the Association of Medical Illustrators, their attendance at the Association of Medical Illustrators annual meeting, whatever other things they want to do, whether they want to go to SIGGRAPH or, having other memberships, other training, anything that they want that's for their career, we want to facilitate that. But also, we work in Slack, so there's a lot of talk and so forth. We have bi-weekly meetings where we kind of socialize, but we don't track how much they work. We don't track we don't even really track vacation time. If they want a day off, just let us know, have them let us know. I mean, we have a limit in the contract that is there just in case somebody were to abuse it. Or none of my team would ever do that.
I hope they're listening to this.
Yeah, and I've told them before, our philosophy is, if you are overworked, you need time off. So if we sometimes you get a hard project, that just requires you to put in extra hours. Maybe you even have to do weekend hours. If that's the case, you definitely need time to recover. And so we do whatever we can to try to encourage our animators to make sure that they take the downtime they need to kind of heal from a hard project before they, get back in.
Nice. I think that's really honorable when you could take one of many other paths that don't offer this, this kind of lifestyle. Also, it sounds like you've kind of come full circle for yourself and realized that too, and you're trying to create a space for other people to kind of thrive in there too. And the last thing I wanted to say about that was, I really like your hedge maze analogy, because life, at least from my experience, life will take you in its own direction if you don't take charge. Even if you see that beam on the horizon and you go towards it and you reach a wall, if you don't keep cutting those things down, you're going to end up somewhere that you didn't exactly want to be in. There's many instances in my life where I've kind of had a wake-up call and been like, oh, I just got here because I was following the tide and I didn't intentionally get here, and I had to kind of start things over and cut down those hedge mazes. So I really like that. And that's it's very clear from the story you've told me and where you're at now. I'm wondering, as we're wrapping up, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think would be good to share with those listening?
I think anybody who's considering going into scientific animation, I encourage you to reach out. The Association of Medical Illustrators has a fantastic mentorship apparatus, a whole program that has more mentors than it has mentees. So our industry is very open and welcoming and encouraging, and everybody lifts everybody else up. So if you want to get into scientific animation, you want to talk about like how to go about doing it, what you need to know in the beginning, maybe you want to pivot halfway through life. I have one friend, Mike Jensen, who he was in his 40s when he decided to go into medical illustration. Up until then, he was doing illustrations for the Curious George book series. Huh. So you can take a hard turn to go into it, and now he's a professor at Augusta University. So like if you're interested in getting into it, if this is something that you want to do, by all means, reach out to me. info@microversestudios.com is going to go to both me and my production manager. We will make time to talk.
Nice. Well, I think that's great. And if you're listening, 100% do that. So anyways, thank you so much, Cameron, for coming on the chat. It's been an absolute pleasure picking your brain and learning about this super interesting world that I never even considered as an animator.
Well, thank you for being so thoughtful and so patient with the technical difficulties.
Hey, that's all right. And if you're listening and you want to, reach out to Cameron or follow his work or Microverse Studios, definitely hit up the link that we talked about. But you can also check out their blog on their website, which is microversestudios.com, or follow them on LinkedIn, which is Microverse Studios. And I'll include both those links in the description of this chat. And that's all for now. So thank you so much for listening. Okay, bye. The music for this podcast was composed by Will Farmer and the graphics by Daniel Abensauer. I encourage you to look them up if you enjoyed their work.